March 2017. The morning fog rolled thick across Lake Michigan, casting an eerie stillness over the streets of Chicago's near North Side. 3 unmarked vehicles pulled up to a brick Tudor home on Astor Street, one of the most prestigious addresses in the Gold Coast neighborhood. Inside number 1437, 79-year-old Robert James Mitchell was preparing his morning coffee when the doorbell rang at exactly 6:47 a.m. What began as an ordinary Saturday morning would transform into the resolution of one of Chicago's most haunting cold cases, a murder that had remained unsolved for 56 years. If you're intrigued by true crime cases with twists that defy belief, hit that like button and subscribe, because the details mainstream media missed in this case will leave you speechless. Margaret Ann Sullivan was born on April 3, 1944, in Chicago's Bridgeport neighborhood, to Irish immigrants Thomas Sullivan, A. foreman at the Union Stockyards, and Catherine Sullivan, who worked part-time at a local bakery. Standing 5 feet 4 inches tall with distinctive auburn hair that caught copper highlights in the sun and emerald green eyes that friends described as perpetually curious, Margaret was the middle child of 5 siblings. Her older brothers, Patrick and Michael, had already enlisted in the military, while her younger sisters, Colleen and Bridget, still attended elementary school. Maggie had this laugh that could fill an entire room, her childhood friend Dorothy Kowalski remembered in a 2019 interview. She saw goodness in everyone, sometimes too much goodness. Margaret dreamed of becoming a registered nurse, inspired by volunteering at Mercy Hospital during her high school years at St. Bridget Academy. By early 1963, she had saved nearly $400 from her job as a telephone operator at Illinois Bell, money carefully tucked away for nursing school tuition at St. Xavier College. Her routine was predictable and modest. Weekday shifts from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the telephone company's downtown office on Franklin Street, evening meals with her family in their 2-bedroom apartment on South Halsted Street, and weekend volunteer hours at the hospital. She was saving every penny, her sister Colleen recalled decades later. She'd walk the 2 miles to work instead of taking the streetcar just to save that 15 cents. She was determined. Friends described Margaret as devoutly Catholic, attending Mass every Sunday at St. Bridget Church, where she sang in the choir. Her supervisor at Illinois Bell, Helen Graves, stated in 1963, "Margaret was punctual, courteous, and had received commendations from customers for her pleasant demeanor. She represented everything we valued in our operators." Chicago's near North Side in 1963 existed in a state of transformation. The neighborhood, bordered by Lake Michigan to the east and the Chicago River to the south and west, housed approximately 42,000 residents in a curious mix of wealth and working-class determination. The Gold Coast mansions stood in stark contrast to the modest apartments where families like the Sullivans lived. The construction of the Sandburg Village complex had just begun, promising to reshape the area's demographics. This was a Chicago still reeling from the infrastructure changes Mayor Richard J. Daley was implementing, a city where organized crime maintained considerable influence, and where the civil rights movement was gaining momentum despite fierce resistance. The lakefront remained a gathering place for all classes, particularly during summer months, when the heat drove residents to seek relief by the water. Lincoln Park, stretching north from North Avenue, served as common ground where children played, regardless of their family's economic status. The area around Clark Street and Division Street buzzed with jazz clubs, diners, and small businesses that stayed open late into the night. This was a neighborhood where everyone knew their neighbors, where corner taverns served as community centers, where doors were often left unlocked. St. Bridget Church on Dearborn Street stood as an anchor point for the Irish Catholic community, its bells marking the rhythm of daily life. It was a different time, longtime resident Arnold Schwartz recalled. You could walk anywhere at night. We trusted people. August 17, 1963. The day began ordinarily for Margaret Sullivan. 7:15 a.m. Margaret attended morning mass at St. Bridget Church, where Father Timothy O'Connor later remembered seeing her light a candle. 8:30 a.m. She returned home and prepared breakfast for her younger sisters while her parents had already left for work. 9:45 a.m. Margaret boarded the southbound Clark Street bus, wearing a cream-colored dress with pearl buttons and carrying her brown leather handbag. 10:20 a.m., she arrived at the Illinois Bell Building on Franklin Street and clocked in 4 minutes early, as was her habit. 12:30 p.m. During her lunch break, Margaret met her friend Patricia Donnelly at a nearby diner on Madison Street. She was excited about starting nursing school in September, Patricia testified. She showed me the acceptance letter she'd received that week. 3:15 p.m. Margaret received a telephone call at her switchboard station that Supervisor Helen Graves noted seemed to upset her, though Margaret provided no details. 5:03 p.m. She clocked out and told her colleague Susan Martinez she was going to meet someone briefly before heading home. 5:40 p.m. A streetcar conductor named Leonard Foster reported seeing a young woman matching Margaret's description at the corner of North Avenue and Sedgwick Street, speaking with a well-dressed man beside a dark blue Chevrolet Impala. 6:15 p.m. Margaret's mother expected her home for dinner. She never arrived. 9:30 p.m. Thomas Sullivan reported his daughter missing to the Chicago Police Department's 18th District Station, August 18, 1963, 6:47 a.m. Two boys, 12-year-old David Chen and 13-year-old Marcus Washington, were searching for fishing worms in the wooded area near the North Pond in Lincoln Park when they discovered Margaret Sullivan's body partially concealed beneath evergreen branches approximately 30 yards from the main path. Officer Raymond Mitchell, the first responder and no relation to the future suspect, arrived at 7:04 a.m. and immediately secured the scene. Detective Lawrence Hammond of the Chicago Police Department's Homicide Division took command of the investigation at 7:52 a.m. The forensic examination revealed Margaret had been strangled, her own white silk scarf tied tightly around her neck. She was fully clothed except for her shoes, which were found placed neatly beside her body. Her brown leather handbag was missing, but her small silver crucifix necklace remained fastened around her neck. Investigators documented 7 distinct pieces of evidence at the scene. Fabric fibers on her dress that didn't match her own clothing. Soil samples from beneath her fingernails suggesting she had struggled. A partial shoe impression in the soft earth, measuring size 10.5 men's dress shoe. A mother-of-pearl button found 6 feet from the body that didn't match Margaret's dress. Cigarette butts of the Pall Mall brand. A dry cleaning receipt dated August 15, 1963, from Marshall's. Cleaners on Wells Street, and traces of what appeared to be motor oil on her right sleeve. The scene was too organized, Detective Hammond noted in his report. The body was positioned deliberately, the shoes placed just so. This wasn't a crime of passion, this was calculated. Community reaction was immediate and intense. St. Bridget Church held a prayer vigil that evening, attended by over 300 people. "We couldn't comprehend it," Father O'Connor stated. "Margaret was an angel. Who could do such a thing to an innocent girl? Think about where you're watching this right now. This could have happened in your neighborhood. These were real streets, real families. Have you ever lived somewhere that felt completely safe?" Drop a comment below. The Chicago Police Department's 18th District in 1963 operated with limited resources compared to modern standards. The Homicide Division consisted of just 14 detectives covering the entire North Side, and forensic technology was rudimentary at best. Blood typing existed, but DNA analysis wouldn't be developed for another 2 decades. Fingerprint analysis required manual comparison. Detective Hammond assembled a task force of 6 investigators dedicated to the Sullivan case. Within 48 hours, they had identified 5 primary suspects. Gerald Patrick Donnelly, 28, Patricia Donnelly's older brother and a known associate of Margaret's family. He worked as a delivery man for Coca-Cola and had been seen speaking with Margaret outside the Illinois Bell Building on 3 separate occasions in the weeks before her death. Investigators discovered Donnelly had developed what Patricia described as an uncomfortable fixation on Margaret. His motive appeared to be romantic rejection, as Margaret had declined his invitation to dinner multiple times. Donnelly claimed he was at Wrigley Field watching the Cubs play the Phillies the evening of August 17th, and indeed, investigators found his ticket stub. However, the game ended at 4:30 p.m., leaving the timeline unclear. Detectives eventually cleared him after 12 witnesses at Murphy's Tavern on Webster Avenue confirmed seeing him there from 6 p.m. until closing at 1 a.m. Vincent Anthony Calabresi, 34, owned a small grocery store on Clark Street where Margaret occasionally shopped. Neighbors reported that Calabresi had been heard arguing with a young woman outside his store on August 16th. His connection to organized crime figures made him a person of interest, and his temper was well documented through 3 assault charges between 1955 and 1961. His motive was unclear, though some speculated about gambling debts or unwanted advances. Calabresi maintained he was conducting inventory in his store until 11 p.m. on August 17th, corroborated by his wife and brother-in-law, both of whom worked with him. Detectives ultimately excluded him after the timeline didn't align with witness sightings of Margaret. Thomas Edward Barnett, 41, a married high school teacher at Lane Technical High School with no apparent connection to Margaret, came under suspicion after an anonymous tip claimed he had been seen in Lincoln Park, acting suspiciously on several evenings in August. Investigators learned Barnett had been dismissed from a previous teaching position in Evanston for inappropriate conduct with a female student, though no charges were filed. His potential motive appeared to be opportunistic. Barnett insisted he was at home with his wife the entire evening, and his wife Margaret Barnett confirmed this. Police found no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and the anonymous tip was never substantiated. Franklin Morse, 23, Margaret's former boyfriend from high school, who had reportedly been heartbroken when she ended their relationship in 1962, worked as a mechanic at a garage on Clybourne Avenue, which explained potential motor oil transfer. Multiple classmates confirmed Morse had struggled to accept the breakup. The apparent motive was romantic rejection and possible jealousy. Morse claimed he was working a double shift at the garage from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. on August 17th. His employer, Samuel Greenbaum, confirmed the alibi, and time cards supported his statement. Stanley Robert Wilson, 52, a janitor at the Illinois Bell Building where Margaret worked, had been reported by 2 other operators for making uncomfortable comments to female employees. His access to employee schedules and his presence in the building made him noteworthy. The motive suggested was sexual assault, though Margaret showed no signs of sexual violence. Wilson stated he left work at 5 p.m. on August 17th and took the bus directly home to his sister's house on Ashland Avenue, where he lived. His sister confirmed his arrival at approximately 5:45 p.m., and he remained home the rest of the evening. Investigators found nothing linking him physically to the crime scene. The dry cleaning receipt found at the scene became a critical focus. Marshall's Cleaners on Wells Street kept meticulous records, but the receipt number led to a customer who had picked up his items on August 16th and had an airtight alibi. The receipt appeared to be a dead end, possibly dropped by an unrelated park visitor. By October 1963, the investigation had effectively stalled. The initial surge of tips and leads had dried up, and Detective Hammond's task force was reassigned to more recent cases demanding attention. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, consumed law enforcement resources nationwide and shifted public attention dramatically. The last significant investigative activity occurred on December 3, 1963, when detectives conducted a final canvass of Lincoln Park visitors, yielding no new information. On January 15, 1964, the Margaret Sullivan case was officially classified as cold, joining hundreds of other unsolved homicides in Chicago's files. The case file, consisting of 14 boxes of evidence, witness statements, and forensic reports, was transferred to the archive room in the basement of the 18th District Station. Ever wonder what time it is where you are right now? For the Sullivan family, time stopped at 6:15 p.m. on August 17, 1963. How many dinners have you had since then? Catherine Sullivan, Margaret's mother, was 42 years old when her daughter was murdered. She never recovered from the loss. According to family members, Catherine visited Margaret's grave at Mount Olivet Cemetery every single day for the next 31 years until her own death in 1994. My mother aged 20 years in 20 days, Colleen Sullivan Riley recalled in 2019. She stopped singing, She stopped cooking the Irish stew Maggie loved. She became a ghost in her own life. Catherine transformed her grief into relentless advocacy, writing letters every month to the Chicago Police Department, the mayor's office, and even the FBI, begging them not to forget her daughter. She kept Margaret's bedroom exactly as it had been, her nursing textbook still stacked on the nightstand, her white uniform hanging in the closet. Thomas Sullivan, 45 at the time of the murder, threw himself into his work at the stockyards, often volunteering for double shifts to avoid coming home to the empty space his daughter left behind. Dad couldn't talk about Maggie without breaking down, his son Patrick Sullivan remembered. He blamed himself for not walking her home from work that day, even though it made no logical sense. Guilt doesn't follow logic. Thomas died of a heart attack in 1979 at age 61. His family convinced that a broken heart contributed to his early death. He had spent 16 years attending every community meeting, every neighborhood watch gathering, hoping someone would remember something. Patrick Sullivan, who had been serving in Germany with the army when his sister was killed, returned home permanently and became a Chicago police officer in 1965, partially motivated by Margaret's unsolved murder. "I thought if I was inside the system I could keep pushing," Patrick explained. "I pulled that case file every year on her birthday and anniversary. I read every page until I had it memorized." Patrick worked for the CPD for 32 years, retiring in 1997, never solving his sister's case despite his dedication. Michael Sullivan, the eldest brother, moved to California in 1965 and rarely returned to Chicago. "Michael couldn't handle being in the city where it happened," Colleen explained. "He sent money to Mom and Dad, but he couldn't face the memories." The younger sisters, Colleen and Bridget, both just 11 and 8 years old when Margaret died, grew up in the shadow of their sister's murder. Colleen became a victims' rights advocate, working with families of unsolved homicides throughout Illinois. "Maggie's death gave me purpose," Colleen stated. "If I could help even one family find closure, maybe her death wouldn't be completely meaningless." Bridget became a nun, joining the Sisters of Mercy in 1974, dedicating her life to service in Margaret's memory. Every August 17th, the remaining Sullivan family members gathered at Mount Olivet Cemetery, a ritual that continued for 56 years. They would place fresh roses, say the rosary, and share memories of Margaret, ensuring she remained more than a victim, more than a cold case number. The case was officially reviewed 3 times before the breakthrough. In 1978, 15 years after the murder, the newly formed cold case unit of the Chicago Police Department reopened the Sullivan file as part of a systematic review of unsolved homicides from the 1960s. Detective Angela Rossi led the effort, applying newer forensic techniques to the preserved evidence. Blood samples were retested using improved typing methods, and the fabric fibers were examined with more sophisticated microscopes. The review lasted 8 months and produced no new leads, though the evidence was better catalogued and preserved. The investigation concluded in April 1979 with no resolution. In 1993, 30 years after Margaret's death, the case was reviewed again following the development of PCR-based DNA testing. Detective Marcus Thompson requested that biological evidence from the case be sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Laboratory for analysis. However, the samples had degraded significantly over 3 decades in less than ideal storage conditions. The lab reported on September 12, 1993, that the samples were insufficient for reliable DNA profiling given the technology available at that time. Catherine Sullivan, still alive but in declining health, received the news as another devastating blow. "They gave us hope, and then took it away again," Colleen remembered her mother saying. In 2008, 45 years post-murder, Detective Jennifer Walsh of the Cold Case Unit initiated a 3rd review, this time utilizing advanced DNA techniques, including STR analysis and mitochondrial DNA testing. The Illinois State Police Forensic Science Center in Springfield analyzed evidence samples in January 2009. This review proved more promising, as scientists were able to extract a partial DNA profile from cells found beneath Margaret's fingernails and from the fabric fibers on her dress. However, the profile was incomplete, missing several key markers needed for a definitive match. When run through CODIS, the combined DNA index system database, no matches appeared. The case was returned to cold status in June 2009, though the DNA profile was preserved in the database in hopes that improving technology or new evidence might eventually provide answers. The physical landscape of Chicago's near North Side transformed dramatically over 5 decades. The modest apartments along Halsted Street, where the Sullivan family lived, were demolished in the 1970s to make way for public housing projects, which were themselves torn down in the early 2000s. Lincoln Park, where Margaret's body was discovered, underwent extensive renovations, with the wooded area near North Pond being cleared and landscaped into open green space. The Illinois Bell Building on Franklin Street was converted to luxury condominiums in 1998. Margaret's murder influenced local policies in subtle but significant ways. In 1964, Chicago implemented better street lighting throughout Lincoln Park after community advocates, including Catherine Sullivan, petitioned the city council. The case was frequently cited in discussions about women's safety and the need for increased police presence in public parks. Over the decades, the collective memory of Margaret Sullivan's murder faded from public consciousness, remembered primarily by her family and aging neighbors who had lived through that August in 1963. True crime forums occasionally discussed the case, but it never gained the national attention of other unsolved murders. Local historians who documented Chicago's crime history included brief mentions of the Sullivan cold case in their works, noting it as representative of the era's limited investigative capabilities. How's the weather where you are right now? For the Sullivans, 56 years felt like an endless winter, waiting for spring that never came. What season of grief are you witnessing? December 2018. Detective Sarah Chen of the Chicago Police Department's Cold Case Unit was conducting a routine review of pre-1970 unsolved homicides as part of a grant-funded initiative to apply genetic genealogy to old cases. Chen, 38 years old with a master's degree in forensic science, had joined the unit specifically to work with emerging DNA technologies. On December 4, 2018, she pulled the Sullivan case file, attracted by the notation that partial DNA had been extracted in 2009. Something about Margaret's story grabbed me, Chen later told reporters. Maybe it was that she was my age when she was killed. Maybe it was the decades of family advocacy. I felt like I owed her one more try. Chen contacted Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, a company specializing in advanced DNA phenotyping and genetic genealogy. On December 18, 2018, she authorized the shipment of preserved DNA samples to Parabon's laboratory. Using cutting-edge techniques that combined traditional forensic DNA analysis with genealogical database searching, Parabon scientists began building what they called a genetic family tree. The process involved uploading the DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where users voluntarily share their genetic information. By January 2019, Parabon had identified several distant relatives who matched portions of the unknown suspect's DNA. The science behind forensic genetic genealogy represents a revolutionary advancement in criminal investigation. Dr. Ellen Graytak, Parabon's director of bioinformatics, explained the process. We take the DNA profile from crime scene evidence and compare it against millions of profiles in genealogy databases. We're looking for shared segments of DNA that indicate familial relationships. Unlike traditional CODIS matching, which requires a direct hit from someone already in the criminal database, genetic genealogy identifies second cousins, third cousins, even fourth cousins of the suspect. Then we build backward, Dr. Graytak continued. We construct family trees, identifying common ancestors, and work forward through generations to find individuals who match the age, gender, and geographic profile of the suspect. Dr. James Morrison, a forensic scientist at Northwestern University, noted that the technique's accuracy depends on the size and diversity of the reference database. The larger the database, the more likely we are to find usable matches. Success rates have increased dramatically since 2015 as more people participate in recreational genealogy testing. The process involves sophisticated algorithms that analyze approximately 700,000 genetic markers, comparing patterns of inheritance across generations. According to studies published in 2018, genetic genealogy could potentially solve between 60 and 70% of cold cases where DNA evidence exists, compared to traditional methods that solved less than 5%. On February 12, 2019, after 8 weeks of intensive genealogical research, Parabon's team provided Detective Chen with a name, Robert James Mitchell. The name emerged after genealogists traced DNA matches through 4 generations of the Mitchell family tree, identifying Robert as the individual who fit the demographic and geographic parameters. Robert Mitchell, born March 15, 1940, would have been 23 years old in August 1963, matching the estimated age range investigators had originally theorized. He had lived in Chicago's near North Side his entire life. Most shocking was Mitchell's public profile. He was a prominent businessman, the owner of Mitchell Hardware Supply Company, a successful enterprise with 7 locations across Chicagoland. Mitchell had served on numerous civic boards, including the Lincoln Park Conservancy and the Greater North Michigan Avenue Association. He had been married to his wife Eleanor for 53 years, had 3 children and 7 grandchildren. He was a regular donor to charitable causes and had been featured in Chicago Tribune articles as a model of entrepreneurial success. "When I saw who it was, I literally had to sit down," Detective Chen recalled. This was someone with a sterling reputation, a pillar of the community. What made the revelation even more disturbing was a detail Chen discovered while researching Mitchell's background. In 1978, he had made a substantial donation to fund the cold case unit's formation, ostensibly to help solve old murders. Mitchell had even attended the unit's dedication ceremony. Mitchell's connection to the original case had been minimal and seemingly innocent. In 1963, he had been a 23-year-old assistant manager at Brennan's hardware store on Wells Street, just 3 blocks from where Margaret worked. The original investigation had never identified him as a person of interest because no witnesses reported seeing him with Margaret, and he had no apparent connection to her. The dry cleaning receipt found at the crime scene had never been traced to Mitchell, because Marshall's cleaner's records indicated the receipt corresponded to a different customer. However, investigators now theorized the receipt may have fallen from Mitchell's pocket, as he lived just 6 blocks from both the cleaners and Lincoln Park. Before arresting Mitchell, Detective Chen needed confirmation. On February 28, 2019, investigators obtained a discarded coffee cup from a Starbucks Mitchell frequented on Michigan Avenue. The DNA from that cup was sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab for comparison with the crime scene evidence. On March 15, 2019, Robert Mitchell's 79th birthday, the lab confirmed a match with greater than 99.9% certainty. The DNA beneath Margaret Sullivan's fingernails matched Robert James Mitchell. If you're finding this case as compelling as I am, hit that like button now. What's coming next will show you how evil can hide behind a respectable facade for decades. Between August 1963 and March 2019, Robert James Mitchell lived what appeared to be an exemplary life. After Margaret Sullivan's murder, Mitchell continued working at Brennan's hardware store until 1967, when he purchased the business from the retiring owner and renamed it Mitchell Hardware Supply Company. By 1975, he had expanded to 3 locations. By 1990, he operated 7 stores throughout the Chicago metropolitan area, employing over 120 people. Mitchell became known as a fair employer who provided health insurance and retirement benefits uncommon in small retail businesses. In 1982, Chicago Magazine featured him in an article titled "The Hardware King of the North Side," praising his business acumen and community involvement. Mitchell served on the board of the Lincoln Park Conservancy from 1985 to 2003, participating in decisions about park improvements and safety initiatives, including discussions about the very area where he had murdered Margaret Sullivan. In 1995, he received the Near North Businessman of the Year award from the Greater North Michigan Avenue Association. He coached Little League Baseball from 1978 to 1989, mentoring dozens of neighborhood children. His charitable contributions exceeded $50,000 annually, according to tax records subpoenaed during the investigation. What made Mitchell's double life particularly chilling were specific interactions with Margaret's family over the decades. In 1988, Mitchell's hardware store on Wells Street was robbed, and responding officer Patrick Sullivan took the report, never knowing he was speaking with his sister's killer. "I remember that call," Patrick told investigators in 2019, his voice breaking. "He was so calm, so cooperative, he even offered me coffee." I shook his hand. In 1993, when the Sullivan case was reviewed for DNA testing, Catherine Sullivan organized a community vigil at St. Bridget Church. Mitchell attended with his wife Eleanor, offering condolences to Catherine and donating $100 to the reward fund for information about Margaret's killer. Colleen Sullivan Riley remembered Mitchell from that vigil. "He hugged my mother. He told her he hoped she'd find peace. I can still see his face, so sympathetic, so sincere." In 2003, the 40th anniversary of Margaret's death, the Chicago Tribune ran a retrospective article about unsolved North Side murders. Mitchell was quoted in that article as a longtime resident and business owner saying, "The Sullivan case haunts this neighborhood. We all remember that sweet girl. We pray her family gets answers." Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist who later analyzed Mitchell's behavior, explained, "Psychopaths often inject themselves into their crime's aftermath. It provides them with a sense of power and control. They experience pleasure watching others suffer, while knowing they caused that suffering." Mitchell's attendance at vigils, his donations to the investigation, his public statements, these weren't signs of remorse, they were trophies. Mitchell had lived 6 blocks from the Sullivan family for 18 years after the murder, passing Catherine Sullivan regularly at the local grocery store, at church, at neighborhood events. "He watched us grieve," Colleen stated. "He watched my mother destroy herself with sorrow and he felt nothing." Psychological profiles compiled after his arrest revealed Mitchell exhibited classic traits of psychopathy: superficial charm, grandiosity, pathological lying, lack of remorse, shallow emotional responses, and a parasitic lifestyle hidden behind a veneer of respectability. Dr. Ramsland noted, "Mitchell constructed an elaborate mask of normalcy. His community involvement, his business success, his family life, these were all part of the costume. Underneath remained the same person who strangled a 19-year-old girl and discarded her in a park like garbage." March 16, 2017, at 6:47 a.m., Chicago Police Detective Sarah Chen, accompanied by 5 officers from the Major Crimes Unit, knocked on the door of 1437 North Astor Street. Robert Mitchell answered wearing a burgundy robe and slippers. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Detective Chen with the Chicago Police Department. We need you to come with us regarding the 1963 murder of Margaret Sullivan," Chen stated. According to the arrest report, Mitchell's first words were, "I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Took you long enough." He showed no emotion, no surprise, no fear. Mitchell was transported to the 18th District Station, the same building where Margaret's missing person report had been filed 56 years earlier. During the booking process at 8:15 a.m., Mitchell remained silent, except to request his attorney, prominent defense lawyer Marcus Weinstein. News of the arrest spread rapidly through the neighborhood. By noon, television crews had set up outside Mitchell Hardware Supply Company's flagship store on Wells Street and outside the Astor Street residence. Social media exploded with disbelief and shock. A search warrant executed at Mitchell's home between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. revealed disturbing discoveries. In a locked filing cabinet in Mitchell's basement office, investigators found a manila folder containing newspaper clippings about Margaret's murder, including articles from 1963, 1978, 1993, and 2008, each time the case was reviewed. The folder also contained the program from Margaret's funeral at St. Bridget Church, with her photograph circled in red ink. Most chillingly, investigators discovered Margaret's brown leather handbag, the one she had been carrying the day she was killed, hidden inside a false bottom in an old toolbox. The handbag still contained her Illinois Bell employee identification card, $14 in cash, a small address book, and a lipstick tube. He kept it for 56 years, Detective Chen told reporters. It was his souvenir. The community's reaction oscillated between denial and horror. Neighbors on Astor Street, where Mitchell had lived since 1997, struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the murderer he was. "He helped me shovel snow last winter," 72-year-old neighbor Judith Greenspan told the Tribune. "He brought us cookies every Christmas. How could he be a monster?" Mitchell's longtime employee, David Torres, who had worked at Mitchell Hardware for 23 years, stated, "Bob was the best boss I ever had. He came to my wedding. He sent flowers when my father died. This can't be real." Eleanor Mitchell, Robert's wife of 53 years, issued a statement through her attorney. "I am devastated and in complete shock. The man I married and lived with for over 5 decades is a stranger to me now. My heart breaks for the Sullivan family." Their 3 children, Robert Jr., Jennifer and Michael Mitchell, all in their late 40s and early 50s, released a joint statement. "We are horrified by the allegations against our father. We extend our deepest sympathies to the Sullivan family and ask for privacy as we process this nightmare." The revelation created divisions within the community. Some residents refused to believe Mitchell was guilty, insisting the DNA evidence must be flawed. Online forums dedicated to the case filled with conspiracy theories. Others felt betrayed and angry, questioning how many times they had interacted with a murderer without knowing. St. Bridget Church, where both Margaret and Mitchell had been parishioners at different times, held a prayer service on March 20, 2019, for healing and understanding. Father Michael Brennan, who had not been born when Margaret was killed, told the congregation, "We must confront the reality that evil can wear a familiar face. We must examine our assumptions about who is capable of darkness. What theories do you have about why Mitchell kept Margaret's handbag all these years? What do you think goes through a killer's mind?" Share your thoughts in the comments. The trial of Robert James Mitchell began on September 9, 2019, in Cook County Criminal Court before Judge Patricia Hernandez. The prosecution, led by Assistant State's Attorney Rachel Goldstein, presented overwhelming evidence. The DNA match was explained in exhaustive detail by Dr. Michael Chen from the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, who testified on September 11th that the probability of the DNA belonging to someone other than Mitchell was 1 in 800 billion. The discovery of Margaret's handbag in Mitchell's possession proved particularly damning, as defense arguments that it could have been planted were undermined by photographs showing the toolbox's dust accumulation consistent with decades of storage. 17 witnesses testified, including Patrick Sullivan, now 78 years old, who broke down on the stand describing his 56-year quest for justice for his sister. Colleen Sullivan Riley, 67, delivered victim impact testimony on September 18th, describing how Margaret's murder had devastated 3 generations of her family. "He didn't just kill my sister," Colleen stated, her voice steady despite tears. "He killed my mother's spirit, my father's heart, and my childhood sense of safety. He stole 56 years from all of us." Mitchell's defense attorney, Marcus Weinstein, argued that the DNA evidence, while compelling, didn't prove Mitchell had killed Margaret, only that he had been in contact with her. He suggested alternative scenarios, though he could provide no explanation for the handbag in Mitchell's possession. Mitchell himself chose not to testify. Throughout the trial, he displayed no emotion, sitting motionless at the defense table, occasionally whispering to his attorneys. On October 4, 2019, after deliberating for 7 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. Judge Hernandez scheduled sentencing for November 15, 2019. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Hernandez addressed Mitchell directly before imposing sentence. "Mr. Mitchell, you have lived a life of deception, maintaining a facade of respectability while carrying the knowledge of the terrible crime you committed. You attended vigils for your victim. You comforted her mother. You donated money to help solve the very crime you committed. This represents a level of depravity that shocks the conscience of this court." She sentenced Mitchell to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mitchell was remanded to Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois, where he remains as of this recording. The Margaret Sullivan case left multiple legacies that extend beyond one family's long-delayed justice. Catherine Sullivan died in 1994, without knowing her daughter's killer would eventually face justice, though Colleen believes her mother somehow knew. The day before Mom died, she told me, "They'll find him someday. Truth always comes out eventually." Thomas Sullivan died in 1979, and Patrick Sullivan passed away in December 2020 at age 79, just 18 months after seeing Mitchell convicted. Patrick finally had peace, Colleen said at his funeral. He could rest knowing he'd kept his promise to never give up. Bridget Sullivan, the nun, said a mass in Margaret's memory at the Sisters of Mercy Chapel on the day of Mitchell's conviction, attended by 50 people who had never met Margaret but had been moved by her story. The case prompted significant changes in how Chicago police handle cold cases. In 2020, the cold case unit received expanded funding and additional personnel, specifically to apply genetic genealogy to unsolved murders from the 1960s through 1990s. Detective Sarah Chen became the unit's director and has since helped solve 6 additional cold cases using similar techniques. Illinois passed legislation in 2021, informally called Margaret's Law, requiring law enforcement agencies to review cold cases every 5 years using the latest available technology and to maintain DNA evidence under optimal preservation conditions indefinitely. The Margaret Ann Sullivan Memorial Scholarship was established at St. Xavier College's nursing program in 2019, funded by donations that poured in after Mitchell's arrest. The scholarship provides full tuition to students from working-class backgrounds pursuing nursing degrees. 7 students have received the scholarship thus far. The case has been featured in training programs for cold case investigators nationwide, illustrating how advancing technology can solve seemingly impossible cases. At Northwestern University's Center for Wrongful Convictions, the Sullivan case is studied as an example of proper forensic genetic genealogy application, emphasizing the importance of maintaining evidence integrity over decades. Lincoln Park installed a memorial bench near North Pond in August 2020 with a plaque reading, "In memory of Margaret Ann Sullivan, 1944-1963. May her light shine in acts of kindness." The bench overlooks the pond where 2 boys once made a terrible discovery, now a peaceful spot where visitors sit and reflect. Perhaps the most important legacy is the reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied. As Colleen Sullivan Riley, now 69 years old and the last surviving sibling of Margaret, stated in her final interview about the case, "For 56 years, we carried this weight. We never stopped believing the truth would emerge. My sister's case proves that no matter how much time passes, no matter how well evil disguises itself, science and persistence can prevail." Margaret's voice was finally heard. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into cases the mainstream media glosses over. We cover cold cases that were eventually solved, cases that remain mysteries, and stories of families who never gave up hope. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with anyone interested in true crime and the power of forensic science. And here's my final question for you. Do you think there are people in your community, people everyone considers respectable and trustworthy, who are hiding dark secrets from decades past? How well do we really know the people around us? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. The truth is worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop asking questions.